Week 15, some defenses you need because defense, they're a big part of fantasy football, believe it or not. There's a few defenses I'm looking ahead heading into Week 15. The first one is the Minnesota Vikings. They didn't have a great game, obviously, versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But next week they got a great matchup versus the Chicago Bears, who give up the sixth most fantasy points to defenses. And now with Mitchell Trubisky behind center, there's going to be some turnovers. And the Vikings, they got a decent defense. This game will be indoors, which is good next week. And the Vikings, they're available in 54% of fantasy leagues. I think they can make a few plays on Mitchell Trubisky with a few sacks, get maybe an interception or two, and possibly find the end zone. So they're the first defense I like. The second one's the San Francisco 49ers. They got a decent matchup versus the Dallas Cowboys, is the 49ers. And this week versus the Washington football team, they didn't have a bad game either, only giving up 11 points with 2 sacks and an interception versus the Dallas Cowboys and their banged-up offensive line. I think the 49ers, they can make a few plays, get to Andy Dalton, who's not mobile at all, really, and possibly find the end zone as well. I know they're available only in 30% of fantasy leagues, but if they're still out there for whatever reason, San Francisco, they're a good get at defense this week, so they're the second D. The third one's the Arizona Cardinals, and we saw Arizona have a huge game versus the New York Giants yesterday with 7 points allowed, 8 sacks, and 3 fumble recoveries for 18 fantasy points. And this week, the Cardinals in Week 15, they got a pretty solid matchup versus the Philadelphia Eagles that give up the third most fantasy points to defenses. I know Jalen Hurts was in there, and he looked good, and they only turned the ball over once with Philly versus the Saints yesterday. But the Cardinals, they can make plays. They get to the quarterback, and Philly's offensive line, they're not that healthy as well. So Arizona, they're available in 75% of fantasy leagues, and their team, I'm willing to go get on waivers this week after a nice performance versus the Giants. The 4 teams, the Buffalo Bills. The Bills, they play on Saturday night. This week is Buffalo. After a nice game yesterday versus the Pittsburgh Steelers, where they had 12 fantasy points, 15 points allowed, a sack, 2 interceptions, and a pick-6 touchdown. The Bills, they're available in 41% of leagues. They play Saturday, like I said, versus the Denver Broncos, who they're turnover prone, even though yesterday I know they had a great game versus that Carolina defense. But this Buffalo D, they play hard, they play physical, and I think they have a good game versus the Denver Broncos. We're possibly finding the end zone and making a couple sacks and returns and stuff. And the fifth and final defense I'm looking ahead heading into Week 15 is actually the Philadelphia Eagles. This game, I think both defenses could be pretty good here in Week 15 in the matchup, Arizona and Philly. Kyler Murray, his numbers have gone down the last few weeks. He's a quarterback that holds the ball a lot, and he takes a lot of sacks, and we saw it again yesterday versus the Giants, even though Arizona had a good offensive putout. And in this game, Philly, I could see them get to the quarterback and make plays like they did versus Taysom Hill yesterday in that game. So these defenses, I think they can help you, and they're not bad waiver gets heading into week. So that's a few defenses I'm looking to add on waivers heading into Week 15.